Some deny this grand power of God in Nicaragua because they do not serve God. They serve the devil.
Those are the words of Rosario Murillo, vice president and mouthpiece of the Ortega regime in Nicaragua in January, 3 days before the expulsion of Bishop Rolando Alvarez and 18 other clergymen who had been held for months as political prisoners. Just this week, the anti-cleric rampage continued, with the expulsion to Guatemala of the head of the Nicaraguan Episcopal Conference.
In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
they say globalism comes to die at CIPA, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes on El Faro English.
I'm Roman Gressier, the editor of El Faro English, and this is Central American Minutes, our weekly brief on important happenings in the region. It's Friday, November 15th. We'll get back to the crackdown on religious freedom in Nicaragua in just a bit. But first up, we look to San Jose, Costa Rica, where Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele landed on Monday for an official visit with his peer, Rodrigo Chaves. My Costa Rican colleague Álvaro Murillo reported for El Faro English this week on the trip in a piece titled, Bukele to receive mixed welcome in official visit to Costa Rica. Bukele sought to meet with the Costa Rican Supreme Court too, but the plenary of magistrates refused. According to newspaper La Nación, magistrates cited his, quote, attacks on judicial independence in El Salvador, which clash with Costa Rican values. Bukele was nonetheless received with fanfare by the Chaves administration and parts of the public and assembly. Some legislators cite his repressive security policy as a model that should be considered in Costa Rica. The country is facing a significant uptick in drug trafficking-related homicides. Chaves decorated Bukele with Costa Rica's highest diplomatic honor, and the two men announced that they had founded a, quote, League of Nations, yes, like the name of the precursor to the UN, focused on security and prosperity. They said they would also make the proposal to the incoming Trump administration. Bukele then sent Salvadoran soldiers this week to Costa Rica to attend to damage and humanitarian fallout from tropical storms. They were sent prior to receiving authorization to step foot on Costa Rican soil from the assembly. But legislators quickly granted an exceptional permit for 75 Salvadoran soldiers on Wednesday. Costa Rica abolished its military in 1948, but the Chaves administration has insinuated that it would be nice to have one in order to tend to its security crisis. Murillo writes that Bukele, quote, enjoys both the admiration of President Chaves as well as a significant sector of the Costa Rican population, while others level criticism against the Salvadoran leader for his authoritarian behaviors and the concentration of power he has overseen, under the justification of neutralizing gang violence. Chaves, for his part, enjoys the support of over half the Costa Rican population. This is particularly striking, given his years of confrontation with the judiciary, legislature, and prosecutor's office, in the country with the deepest democratic tradition in Central America. Prosecutors have opened a range of criminal probes into the president, including into parallel campaign financing and alleged negotiations to reduce homicides with networks tied to the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. In turn, Chaves has accused prosecutors of, quote, bullying and harassing top government officials in order to prevent them from challenging the, quote, old structures of power. That's a battle cry spanning the region. In Washington, D.C., Trump is moving quickly to nominate loyalists as members of his cabinet. As Secretary of State, he has proposed Florida Senator and former presidential rival Marco Rubio, a staunch critic of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, and one of the most influential foreign policy voices in the Republican Party. In Senate hearings, Rubio has shown himself as sympathetic to commercial sanctions against Nicaragua, including the free trade agreement CAFTA. He has at times portrayed U.S. anti-corruption policy in Guatemala, directed at Attorney General Consuelo Porras in particular, as partisan meddling. But last year, he did condemn Porras' illegal attacks on the democratic transition. Rubio has also shown skepticism toward the Biden administration's lukewarm criticism of human rights abuses under the Salvadoran state of exception. This is Rubio in July 2022 in the Senate confirmation hearing for current U.S. Ambassador William Duncan, who has led a diplomatic 180 toward cooperation with the Bukele regime.
Because I'm hoping that we can still have a relationship in El Salvador that's pragmatic. We don't have to clap or celebrate all the stuff people do that we don't necessarily think is good, but I also think we have a national interest concern there that needs to be balanced.
Then there is controversial Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who was nominated as Trump's Attorney General and resigned from Congress just in time to dodge the publication of a House ethics probe into alleged sex with a 17-year-old, including transportation over state lines. According to The New Yorker, he has said he didn't know that the girl was underage. Gaetz has taken a special interest in El Salvador as Bukele has increased his presence in recent months on far-right U.S. media outlets. He attended Bukele's unconstitutional re-election, calling the Salvadoran president a, quote, inspiration to the Western world. And when he got home, he founded the El Salvador Caucus to, quote, vindicate the choices Bukele has made in shunning the siren call of globalism. Gaetz is expected to face challenges in getting even the Republican-controlled Senate to back his nomination. His successful efforts to remove former Republican Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy polarized the Republican caucus. If he is confirmed, he will oversee the Department of Justice, which is handling landmark prosecutions of MS-13 that were launched during the Trump years and vigorously pursued under Biden. Prosecutors accuse 6 of the 27 indicted gang leaders of negotiating with the Bukele administration. The U.S. Treasury has sanctioned top Bukele officials for leading these talks. If he is confirmed, Gaetz will oversee a department that has aggressively contended that, as part of these secret talks, the gangs demanded that the Bukele administration refuse to extradite the leaders to the United States. According to El Faro reporting, most of the men reportedly remain in Salvadoran custody. Hey, if Central American Minutes is clicking for you, consider subscribing to the signature El Faro English newsletter, where we zoom in on one particular issue in the region at least once a week. Our podcast and our newsletter go hand in hand in our mission to translate Central America. You can subscribe by going to our front page at elfaro.net/en. Our mantra this year at El Faro English is simple: journalism must go on. Last, we returned to Managua, where this week the Ortega regime expelled Catholic priest Enrique Herrera, the Bishop of Ortega and president of the Episcopal Conference of Nicaragua. According to reporting from Divergentes, Herrera had criticized the Sandinista mayor of Ortega for municipal noise that interrupted Mass. Catholic services are under state surveillance, and processions are subject to a de facto ban, according to the UN Human Rights Council. From October of last year to this January, as the Ortega Murillo regime also purged the judicial system and other institutions, at least 27 priests were arbitrarily arrested, per the UN. 19 clerics were expelled in January to the Vatican, and other religious leaders have since been released from the regime's prisons. The Ortega-controlled assembly has accused the Catholic Church in particular of being a criminal organization seeking to overthrow the regime. Dozens of Catholic and other religious foundations have been canceled altogether, adding to the thousands of civil society organizations across the country. Journalist Victor Ticay was arrested for covering the religious procession known as Señor de la Reseña in Nandaime. He was then expelled to Guatemala with 134 other former political prisoners in September. The regime has seized the Catholic radio station Radio Maria and co-opted the facilities of the Jesuit-run Central American University. The latter one included the theft of the physical archive of the Institute of History of Nicaragua and Central America, which contains tens of thousands of documents of seminal worth for the study of the region, according to Costa Rican historian Victor Hugo Acuña, who has studied there for years. The archive has been partly digitized and salvaged by the University of Tulane, but there is the risk, says Acuña, that the massive documents will be destroyed or dispersed by the dictatorship. Bishop Enrique Herrera, meanwhile, has been received in Guatemala by the Franciscans, Divergentes reported, joining the dozens of Nicaraguans to find refuge in a neighboring country, counting dozens of political exiles of its own. Thanks for listening to Central American Minutes. I wrote today's episode with production and original soundtrack by Omnion. We'll see you next week.